So I go back to Animal Farm. And if you think of governments as a farm, you really need to ask what the farmers are doing, right? And so if they're wanting to print more money and they're using stable coins as a way to prop up the dollar in order to maintain the purchasing power so they can craft or so they can build the infrastructure needed in order to, bring this farm back into some type of, and then when I say farm in this regard, I'm talking about America, the American system, bring it back into some type of working order because it's been so ravaged by leftist policies, right? So Trump's making a deal. He's the guy who's the art of the deal. He's behind the scenes and he's making all the right deals in order to bring America infrastructure back up to par, to bring America's supremacy back to where it once was. And in order to do that, they need to prop up the dollar. So they're making these deals. They're going to give a favorable regulatory environment for Bitcoin. They're going to allow people to move into Bitcoin, but they're going to print like crazy in order to build things like the $500 billion Stargate AI system that they need, right, in order to maintain, be competitive in the world. And so the question for me becomes, okay, as farm animals on the farm, we're looking around and we're seeing, okay, the farmers are building all this stuff around us. Are they building it in order to control us? Are they building it, are they building the butcher house or are they building like the pastures? What way is this going? And like, how much freedom are we going to have on this farm? Are we going to be surveilled in every direction? Are we going to be restricted in our movements? Are we going to be tagged and chipped and monitored? Or are they going to allow us to roam free on these pastures that they're building? Make sense?
Yeah, it's like just a continuation or an evolution of fiat slavery society, essentially. And either way, it's just a question of what rights are we given.
Yeah. So the other analogy would be that we just have a whole bunch of farms, right? But these farms are independently controlled. That was the idea of the United States originally, right? You basically had these colonies, and these colonies got together and created the United States, which was kind of a general framework, right, on how this jurisdiction should operate and how the colonies within the jurisdiction should, conduct their affairs with one another. And it was never meant to be this one centralized institution that governs every aspect of our life. It was, you belong to the farm that you wanted to belong to. And in that farm, they had their own rules and stuff like that. But the United States federal government was just there as a framework for the colonies and the states, at some point to interact with each other.
So are you saying there's a potential of returning to that framework just at modern technological standards, which means a lot of AI and naturally surveillance? Or are you saying that it could go either way?
I think it could go either way. It depends on the framework in which, Trump is trying to rebuild. Is he trying to rebuild it in a very centralized way where, the federal government maintains control, like all the way to the point of surveilling our movements and our financial transaction? Or is he going to allow the states and like more like even city states to operate as their own kind of farm in this regard, their own jurisdiction with their own set of rules and their own, way of doing things? And the federal government just acts as a kind of rail system in which these independent jurisdictions operate with one another.
Yeah, well, I think the people propping him up, what are their interests besides more money and power? I mean, it's probably just power and control. So the question is, from which route could more control come?
Yeah, so if you think about California, for instance, and you think about A16Z and what they've been wanting to do over there in California, there's tons of red tape. The state has been taken over. The farm over there, California farm, has been taken over by, radical leftists, right? And they're not allowed to innovate, or they feel like they're not allowed to innovate. So what do? They went to the federal government and they basically backed Trump, got him in an office, and now Trump is basically cleaning house, right? And are they doing
so? These people that backed him can innovate again and make a shit ton of money.
For sure, so they're like, okay, this is how we're going to fight it. We're not going to fight it with a war. we're going to fight it through going through the power structure and using that in order to liberate ourselves, basically. And so it's going to be interesting, though, if the federal government is going to become some central force for all of America, or if we're going to be the United, States, which is kind of like this implied expectation that every state can govern themselves. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at whether the United States is going to be more a decentralized network of states, or whether it's going to be command control from the top, from the federal government, with, now with the whole surveillance AI apparatus in place.
Yeah. Well, and then what happens to these states like California? Do they finally learn their lesson and kind of change trajectories? Do they double down? Do they keep doubling down? Like in Hawaii, I just heard that the governor is about to remove the religious exemption from the vaccines for kids, which California basically did in the last few years too. And this is after Trump wins by a landslide and everything. So it's like, are some of these places, as beautiful as Hawaii might be, will it be a bastion for just this outdated leftism?
Yeah. So for me, the question becomes, is Trump in office there in order to, restore liberty to the United States? And that's going to be met with a lot of resistance from the leftists that are in power. So, we could be gearing up for some type of soft civil war in the United States, where, a lot of these, I would say, return to normalcy, return to principles. Let's give Trump the benefit of the doubt and say that he wants to bring America back to a place of liberty where, we have independence from the government, and we have rights, and we don't have to look over our shoulder at Big Daddy government coming to, do whatever they want to do. So now the question becomes for me, is the left just going to give up that power easily? And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, it's funny also just looking at all this, like, I still don't feel comfortable with wherever it goes, regardless of who's in power. Like, I suppose I'm happier that the Trump people are in power now because I'm in the immediate now, the results are better, like to get away from that leftism woke stuff. But at the same time, like, I don't really necessarily look forward to where it's going.
Yeah, because in a sense, it's like the ring of power, right? And you're gonna have to expect that, or hope that Trump gives it back as he consolidates more power in order to dismantle the left. You're like, okay, well, I hope he's a good guy. I hope he is really America first. I hope he does, abide by the Constitution, because if not, all the power that he's consolidating can really turn into a whole control and surveillance apparatus for the entire United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's what a lot of the people that don't like Bukele so much in El Salvador make that argument here. And a lot of them say, oh, we saw the same thing in Venezuela. We saw the same thing, whatever, in Argentina in the 70s, in Chile. Like, they've seen this before, but the world has seen this before in many cases. But for some reason now we have an optimism that we're just, oh no, it'll be fine this time.
You know what?
It's gonna be okay.
And look, I get caught up in the optimism myself when I see Trump.
Well, isn't it nice to be in the optimism? Like, it feels good. You don't feel like you're looking over your shoulder every.
Yeah, well, especially after a decade of being traumatized by the left.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it finally feels good to be winning. And so the question now becomes, is like, the power that they're using to win, will that eventually be relinquished by them, and more of a rights-based system where independent individuals are respected, their rights are respected, they have autonomy, they have agency? Or is that power going to be used to build some sort of other kind of different, oppressive system?
Right. Well, which leads us into AI. Like, fucking hell. what does it matter? Like, does that stuff actually matter? The left versus right? Is any of that stuff going to matter as AI and the technologies, the tools for surveillance, for authoritarianism, for freedom, as all these things disrupt society? I think at most, as it in this video, to make money out of thin air using AI, like all this stuff is going to be so crazy disruptive. Is any of the stuff we talk about, Trump versus the left, is any of that even going to be relevant in a few years?
Yeah, this is a question that I've been wrestling with as I learned the disruptive nature of AI and how it's going to impact society and think about the implications. I'm like, oh my God, a lot of the paradigms in which we think are going to become obsolete. Like they're just not going to make sense. And when I look at the whole, left versus right, the whole political system, just the whole structure of our government, it just looks so antiquated and outdated when you compare it to what AI would be able to do and how integrating AI into, some type of societal structure would be so much more efficient than having corrupt bureaucrats make decisions for you, who are not really beholden or accountable to the people, who have this kind of invisible barrier between DC and the people. So I think we're messing around with AI agents and we're watching worlds be built in cyberspace right now. And I don't think most people understand what's happening, but there are like actual governance systems right now that are creating these worlds and dictating the culture and the human action within those worlds and the artificial intelligence actions, right? Like it's a whole incentive structure that's being devised. And I'm just like, how is the old world relevant? Because a lot of this can be just ported over into the new world, into the actual real world.
Well, as it's like the network state concept, where it's just a matter of time before that network in the digital space is going to ground into physical territory and become a network in the physical space. That's the same concept with it's. How do I put this? Like, it's going to happen with government too. Like, these networks are forming, and those are just going to become our governments. That's where we're making our money. That's where we have our friends. And ideally, sure, we ground them into a real space eventually. But even if you don't, it's still fun to be in an online community and do NFTs or make. My sister was like 11 years old making dolls on Microsoft Paint. She would paint like pixel dolls, and she had a whole community online. And I was like 15 years old. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, she's 10 or 11. She had this whole community of artists online. This has been happening for decades, like news groups in the early 90s, late 80s. Like, online communities are fun. They're nice. You feel a part of something, and it really fulfills something about being human. So this is going to happen more and more, and to the point where, yeah, we're getting paid there, where we've got our friends there, where naturally, like, those are going to be the only rules we want to follow.
Yeah.
Which, again, leads it into, yeah, ideally you have your own physical territory eventually, so those rules align with yours. But what happens to these states? Like, unless a federal government, this framework, these rails you mentioned, unless they're running on an AI, which ideally is super neutral and objective and just wants to, accomplish its tasks of making everything efficient, the state has no purpose to exist anymore. It won't, as everyone just binds into digital tribes.
It's going to be interesting. That's the whole thesis behind the sovereign individual, right? As technology is going to liberate us, it's going to allow us to live a life that's more aligned with what we want, out of life. And as that happens, the power of the nation states, the even relevance of the nation states are going to decline. And in that process, the nation states are going to react, and they're going to, kind of try to cling from the death throes. And that period can be very tumultuous. And so I think we're in that tumultuous time. And so it's going to be interesting.